Justice Secretary, over 2,000 people are dead in Morocco this morning. What help are we providing?
Well, it's an absolutely appalling situation, and we stand ready to provide whatever assistance is required. We have a strong record, whether it was in the Turkish appalling disaster that took place or others. We will do whatever we can. We have certain expertise in terms of search and rescue. We stand ready to do what we can. I know the Foreign Office are in close contact with our counterparts in that country.
And the Moroccans have said what they wanted yet?
Well, I think, as I say, this is a matter that the Foreign Office are leading on, but I've been absolutely assured that we stand ready to do whatever we can, and those contacts are in place.
There's another issue that has arisen this morning, which might indeed land up in your plate as Secretary of State for Justice. It's reported that Parliament has been infiltrated by a Chinese spy, or at least someone working for China who had a parliamentary pass. I know you can't say anything about the specific case, but there's an interesting point here. Parliamentary passes are pretty difficult to get. I don't have one. Is it time to review the allocation of these passes? Because this isn't the first time something like this has happened.
Well, I think firstly, you've got to take this in stages. You say it may end up on my desk. Obviously, there's a police investigation. It could be that independent prosecutors have to look at it, and we shouldn't say anything which could jeopardise those proceedings. But there is a rigorous approach that is taken in terms of being provided with passes. But plainly, this has got to play through in terms of this investigation, and whatever lessons need to be learnt by the parliamentary authorities, I'm sure will be learnt. But it is important to take it in stages.
Indeed, but you wouldn't rule out the possibility that there may be weaknesses in the system that we need to address.
I don't think you should rule anything out. Absolutely. And, you know, the Prime Minister has been very clear when it comes to China. It's an epoch-defining threat, a challenge, forgive me. So, of course, we've got to take it extremely seriously. And I know the police and no doubt other agencies will take it seriously as well, and let's learn whatever lessons need to be learned.
I won't pick you up too much on the Freudian slip of China being a threat, but I suspect that's what many in Parliament think.
Look, I mean, you can't wish China away. China is the world's second biggest economy. If we are going to meet the challenge of climate change, we can't do it without China. They're responsible for about 28% of emissions. We're about 1%. So we have to engage, but we do so with our eyes open. And that's why we take steps like to ensure that Huawei is out of our 5G network, at the same time recognising there is a sensible engagement to have, and that's the position that we're in.
Do you know if Mr Cleverly raised the issue of China's spying, the Confucius Institutes, which they've set up, the use of students spying on other students, which we now know is true? Did Mr Cleverly raise this when he was in Beijing last week?
Well, I haven't had specific conversations with James Cleverly about that, but from speaking to him, and I sit around the cabinet table with him, James and indeed the whole British government, as I say, are very clear and very clear-eyed. We will raise matters with the Chinese that are of concern to us, along the lines potentially that you've referred to, and that's fine. What you can't do, it seems to us, is to step back and say, world's second biggest economy, critical, by the way, to the lives and the livelihoods of people in our country, and have no engagement. So we think it's practical and pragmatic to do so, but to make sure we stand up for our values, that we assert the value of the rule of law, we assert the value of human rights, whilst ensuring that we have that sensible engagement, because the lives and livelihoods of our people can be dependent upon that relationship as well.
All right, let's turn to the story which has no doubt been occupying much of your time this week. You've commissioned, I think, 4 inquiries into the escape of Daniel Khalife. If he did have help from prison staff, we have no idea about that yet, or another prisoner, are you confident that the scope of the reviews that you have set out will reveal who and how he was helped?
Well, let me just step back for a second. First of all, I want to thank the police who've done an absolutely excellent job. Second, I think it is also important to stress that these are very, very rare incidents, but we take them extremely seriously, which is why I set up the inquiries that you referred to look into the circumstances of the apparent escape, but also issues about categorisation. And I asked for there to be preliminary findings on my desk by the end of the week. That's this week. And I am able to say, although, of course, we have to tread carefully because it may be that there are criminal proceedings in due course, but I am able to say that on the issue of whether there were protocols in place, that's to say protocols about when, after food has been unloaded from a van, that the proper head count takes place before you can call the control room, for example, protocols about whether there's a proper search apparatus to look underneath the vehicle. Those protocols were in place, point one. And point two, staff, the relevant security staff, were also in place. Now, plainly, what we have yet to establish is whether those protocols were followed, and that's what the investigation will take place. But one thing I do want to stress, if I just very quickly want to stress, is yes, we've got those thorough internal investigations, but I've also asked for an independent investigation as well, so that we can be absolutely satisfied that the conclusions that are drawn are rock solid.
You do understand how bizarre this seems, especially as you've just told me that there were enough staff, the staff who were supposed to be there, for example, at the airlock, that the vans pass in and out of, that the protocols were there. We don't know if they were observed, but it does seem utterly bizarre to the outside observer that this could have happened. I mean, if it wasn't so serious, it would be almost comic.
Well, it's extremely serious, and you know, that's why the moment it was brought to my attention, I wanted to speak to the governor, and I resolved that we should set up these inquiries. But as I say, these investigations...
And you're confident that the governor knows what, I think it's a she, is
It's a
doing
she,
here?
yeah. Yes, look, absolutely. I'm absolutely confident in the senior leadership of the prison service to conduct a rigorous, searching and fair investigation. And I've also, as I say, got this independent investigation as well. But on these core...
you're not telling me you have confidence in the governor of Wandsworth?
Well, what I'm saying about the position of the governor of Wandsworth is that I have absolute confidence in the senior leadership to get to the bottom of who did their job. You know, we want to absolutely work out, were the protocols followed as they should be? And that should, of course, apply to everyone. And it will be searching and it will be fair. But it is something, as I say, that you need to take thoroughly and you need to take in stages. And I just also want to make the point, if I may briefly, that we are moving at great pace, and I hope to be able to announce next week the terms of reference for the independent investigation that I've referred to.
All right, you mentioned a moment ago the issue of categorisation. Now, Khalife was in what is called a Category B prison, which are training prisons and local prisons. Quite serious places. I've been in Wandsworth, but they're not high security like Belmarsh. This will be part of the review, but just... You must know the answer to this. Now, do you know who would have allocated him to a Category B prison?
Well, as you say, this is part of the review. But what tends to happen is those people who are accused, of course not convicted, accused of certain offences will be considered for categorisation. But this is an important point, that although it's, of course, a very serious matter, it's not without its complexity. So, for example, it's not the case, as it were, that everybody who is to be charged with a specific offence under a specific piece of legislation would automatically go into a certain category of prison. It will depend upon the circumstances, first of all, to do with the risk that they would pose were they to be escape. Do you see the point?
I get the point, but there isn't that much room for doubt when someone is charged with a terror offence. I mean, this was a very serious offence. Now, we may find that actually it isn't as serious as it looks, but on the face of it, this is as serious as it gets.
Well, look,
why is he in a Category B prison?
And so this is absolutely what I want to get to the bottom of, and that's precisely why I set up the investigation, this searching investigation. As I say, the only point I just want to gently make is that it's not entirely without this complexity. I mean, my background is as a lawyer. One of the offences that is charged with Section 58A, but you know, Section 58 of the Terrorism Act 2000. Of course, anything under the Terrorism Act is extremely serious, but it is possible for people to be charged with that offence who the police and the prosecution accept has got no terrorist ideology at all, but is in possession of material that they ought not to be in possession of. So now, let's not get into the details of this because this person will have to stand trial. But equally, all I'm saying is that there might be someone charged under, I don't know, the Criminal Damage Act, for example, and yet they are serial arsonists, allegedly, arson with intent to endanger life, and plainly there are different risk matrices. So we just have to look at the facts, and I wanted to take
I'm not going to drag you into the individual case, but let me ask you a more general question.
Sure.
Do you know how many individuals charged under Section 5 or Section 58, the terrorism offences, are in Category B prisons rather than Category A prisons?
Well, look, what I can say is in respect of Wandsworth, because I wanted to ensure out of an abundance of caution that a prison, that every resource is put into that prison to get to the bottom of what happened and to ensure that security is preserved, is that out of an abundance of caution that some prisoners there, some of those on remand, have been moved. And that is, as I say, out of an abundance of
Do you
caution.
mean moved this week?
Yes, because I wanted to make... Yeah, so additional resources, of course, gone into Wandsworth, so there's additional governor support, a former governor with particular expertise in security, but also, as I say, out of an abundance of caution, around 40 prisoners have been moved to, just while we get to the bottom of what took place in Wandsworth. That is a sensible precautionary measure, as I say, out of an abundance of caution.
So you've moved people from Wandsworth who you think might be threats, who might not belong there. You still haven't quite answered my question. Do you know how many of these kinds of people charged with these very serious offences are in Category B prisons rather than the highest security prisons?
In your question, you mentioned two offences. You mentioned Section 5. So that's Section 5 of the Terrorism Act 2006. So that would be preparing an act of terrorism. Yeah. It is overwhelmingly likely that those who have been charged with those matters will be in Category A. Is it the case that all those charged with Section 58, being in possession of material which likely to be of assistance to a person planning an act of terrorism, that could be, as I say, somebody who has searched for something online, who everyone accepts is not in and of themselves as somebody who is motivated by terrorism? It wouldn't be the case. And incidentally, that piece of legislation has been in force since 2000. So for the thick end of a quarter of a century, categorisation decisions have been made on a case-by-case basis. As I say, look, I just want to make the point. I have, of course, concerns about this issue, which is precisely why I've set up the investigation. I just want to make clear that there are complexities, that's all.
I understand, but, I don't want to get too fussy about language, but you've just used the phrase overwhelmingly likely. What that tells me is that nobody in your department actually knows the answer to the question I asked you, which is how many of these people who are charged with these serious offences are in Category B rather than Category A offences. And presumably, when you complete your review, that is one of the questions you're going to be asking. Is that right, and is the decision-making on this appropriate?
Right. So this is a really important matter because you have people who are on remand, but you also have serving prisoners. So although you're talking about a trainer, that tends to be a Category C trainer. Now, people work their way through sentences, and it can be the case that somebody who starts in a Category A, as they are rehabilitated, as they get ready for release, that they move through the system. So that is an important part of, yes, of course, security is the number one priority. We also want to ensure that prisoners are rehabilitated through the system. So that is precisely why I've asked for an investigation into the facts of this specific case, the Khalife case, but also an investigation into the wider system of categorisation, because these are legitimate questions which I want answers to as well.
All right, let's talk about the wider system. I mean, one thing's clear, and I think you have acknowledged this yourself, we don't have enough prison staff. You're trying to recruit more. Of the ones that we do have, a lot of them are off sick. The number of sick days claimed since 2018 annually is up 60%. And here's the most concerning thing, perhaps. Of those who are on duty, a high proportion are inexperienced. Overall, 1 in 6 are in their first year in the job. Added up, isn't this a system designed for a disaster?
No, well, let me just step back for a second. The first thing to say is that the condition of our prisons is, of course, very important. This is the government that has done more to put money where its mouth is, to invest very heavily in our prisons. And here's a statistic which I think is important. The second biggest programme of government outside HS2 is in prison modernisation and expansion.
I've got that. I'm going to come to the prison estate. I'm asking you about the prison staff.
No, and of course, but having also a safe and decent environment for prison staff as well is very important. And I meet prison staff, and I do just want to make this point. They do an exceptionally important job, because people on those wings have to have the judgment to know when to hold the line and to be firm and robust so you have a safe prison, but also when to show compassion when people are going through difficulties. So but this is a really important... So that's why we've accepted the response of the Prison Service Pay Review Body to provide that 7%. That's why we are recruiting, and additionally, 700 people, additional people into the prison service since May of last year. And here's the really important point. the so-called attrition rate, you know what that means, you know,
Yes.
effectively, is actually down.
The rate at which they leave,
You've got it.
people leave. I understand that.
Exactly. So that
But
is
you're
down.
still
That is
way
down.
short
Well,
of what you want.
So I am absolutely clear and candid. We want to recruit more people. That is true. But if you look at the trajectory, 4,000 more since around 2006, and as I say, that isn't historic. We are on that trajectory as well, and we have accepted these pay review because we accept they are really phenomenal people who do an extremely difficult job. We value them hugely. That's why I had hosted a reception number 10 for them last week, and I really want to encourage people into the service.
All right, but let's talk about the conditions. Overcrowding in Wandsworth, we're told, is running at about 75%. It means too many prisoners are locked up too many hours a day. Men are in cells designed for one person with a cellmate, which means that, let us be frank about it, they have to defecate in front of other people. Now, you've got a building programme. It's going to add 20,000 places over the next 4 years. I want you to look at this. Let's look at what your department predicts for the growth in the prison population over that period. Right now, it's around about 85,000, and it will grow to, I think, 104,000. Now, 104,000, I know, is the top prediction, but that could be where you are. So you will add 20,000 places, and you'll add 20,000 prisoners. So they will continue to be as overcrowded and shockingly bad conditions as they are now.
So, a few things to say. You talked about crowding. So if you go back 20, 25 years, the levels of so-called crowding are approximately the same in somewhere like Wandsworth. But the difference is we are the government that has been absolutely determined. And by the way, this Prime Minister, when he was Chancellor, to put very significant money into it. And in the interest of balance, I think it's important to know, if you go to some of these modern prisons, so this isn't just saying, OK, we'll spend some money and hopefully we'll get some prisoners. If you go, for example...
Well, most of the estate is not modern at all.
No, but if you go, for example, to HMP Berwyn, if you go to HMP Five Wells or HMP Foss Way, I would love to take you there, Trevor. It is quite remarkable. So you go in, I want you to imagine, if you would, you have extraordinary workshops where people can learn, you know, joinery. It's really a safe, decent, rehabilitative prison. And that's what modernising the estate is about.
But, Secretary, most prisons aren't like that. Actually, let me show you something else. I don't want to do too much of a slideshow, but let me show you something else, written by a leading Conservative figure in 2017. And he said, in a decent society, prisons must be places of safety. They must be humane. Today, our prisons are far too violent and far too crowded. Society should not have a bleeding heart about its prisoners, but it shouldn't have blood on its hands either. That is very strong language.
Yeah. And look, but I agree with every syllable of that. I absolutely agree. We should be robust, the safety of the public, but we want to have a humane...
That's not where we are, is it?
But it's precisely why we're investing so heavily. So, as I say, this £4 billion is important. But also, if I could just add one other thing, because you talked about prison officers... Very quick. No, but just very... because it matters. That's why we've invested £100 million for prisoner security. So that means that all the officers have body-worn videos, because that's how you dial down the temperature in prison.
But, by the way, do you know who this is?
Well, it could be... Frankly, it could be any number of my excellent colleagues. Is it me?
Actually, it's you.
Well, there you go.
From your own constituency website. And
I agree with it.
I hear that your point about your ambitions, but we are now 6 years on from the time you made that statement.
Yes,
and you would acknowledge we are
Trevor,
nowhere near that humane system.
But
you would acknowledge that we are not in the humane situation.
Shall I tell you where we are? We've got 2 brand new prisons that are set up, plus Millsike is being constructed.
You would acknowledge that your ambitions have not been met.
We've got further to do, but what I would also acknowledge is that there are 4,000 more officers since that time, that we've opened Foss Way, that we've opened Five Wells, that Millsike is being built, that we've got refurbishments taking place in house blocks in Liverpool, in Stockton, in Rye Hill, in Birmingham, that there's a huge amount of effort that is going, and resource that is going into this.
OK, you can go through all the prisons. Let me just ask you one other thing. There's so many other things I could talk to you about prisons. Sure. Including, by the way, that there have been 7 prison ministers in the last 4 years, which is another thing.
I was one of them.
I know you were. Yeah. But I think that might be part of the explanation for where we are. But I want to ask you about something that's come up today. The Prime Minister said in Delhi yesterday that he wouldn't rule out squeezing welfare benefits in order to provide room for tax cuts. Now, some of your backbench colleagues think that's a good thing. They think tax cuts are vital to boost the economy pre-election. Is this a live cabinet discussion?
Well, look, that's a matter for the autumn state. It's a matter for the Chancellor. I do just want to...
No, I'm just asking if you guys in the Cabinet talk about it.
As you know, I can't talk about what happens in the Cabinet. It's the whole purpose of
you
the
can
Cabinet.
Tell me what the agenda is.
As you know, I can't talk about it. But I think the really important thing to notice is that, and it's relevant to prisons, so this government put in £94 billion to support people when the cost of living, particularly in respect of gas and electricity. To put that £94 billion in context, the total prisons budget is around about £5 billion. So very, very significant sums going in, and that's before you consider freezing fuel duty and so on.
But you're a big cheese now in the Cabinet. If the Chancellor came forward this suggestion, would you be personally comfortable with the idea of squeezing benefit to provide tax cuts?
We must do everything we can for the most disadvantaged in society. But it's important because that's why we put up benefits by 10%, 10.1%, and also universal credit, but also the pension as well. So we want to ensure, I will want to ensure, my colleagues will want to ensure that we are decent, humane, and that we support people.
I'm taking that as a no.
You can take it as you like.
Justice Secretary, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Trevor.